Hi, you're listening to Photofocus. My name is Rich Harrington, and this is the September 15th edition. And joining me this week is Scott Bourne.
Hey, good to be with you. And of course, we're going to later be joined by Eddie Tapp. Rich, we had a great week at Photoshop World. We managed to get some of the biggest influencers in the photography business on mic. So we're going to be sharing some of those interviews in the next few weeks. I'm excited to hear them.
Yeah, it's always great to catch up with other pros who share their insight and just like you, who are passionate about making the industry better. Now, Scott, you and I had a very fun week of Photoshop World. In fact, got together a couple days early, and I was excited. You know, as long as we've known each other, we've gone out shooting together a couple times. We've hung out, but I actually got to go on one of your reel shoots, and let me just tell you, it was a blast. But we were total gear hogs. I don't want to spoil it because there is the big reveal, and those who read the Photofocus blog, I saw that post got a lot of hits. Let me just tell you, it was cool, and there was a little bit of bonsop there, back of napkin, seat of pants. Like there was planning. But it's always awesome when things go better than you plan. And that the whole shoot, magic's not the right word, but it was like creative serendipity plus a little bit of good luck and some hard work. And man, that was a great picture. Would you talk about it? Tell them what happened.
Well, we had a job to shoot a Jaguar for a European magazine, and the Jaguar photograph included a nude girl, which is why it was for a European magazine, because here in the United States, apparently we're not allowed to know that girls can be nude.
The U.S. edition, she's blurred. The whole thing.
She's not even in the U.S. edition. Anyway.
That's right. Well, there's the content-aware fill tool, so you know.
So I had scouted out this place called the Dry Lake Bed, very well known here to local shooters. It's just sounds like what it is. It's used to be a lake. It's dry, and you get the old cracks, and it looks like the Mojave Desert. And I've shot there 53 times. And as you and I always tell people you should scout. Well, I didn't think I needed to go back out that morning or anything, and I didn't. And as we came down the hill to go do this shoot.
It was great. My assistant was in the car with me because she was in town too. So Pamela Berry was there. And we crest the hill, and she's like, is that where we're shooting? I'm like, no, that can't be it. That's a lake. He said it was the Dry Lake Bed.
Yeah, I thought it was a mirage. I wasn't too worried. Then I rolled up and I was like, crap, there's a lake where the Dry Lake Bed used to be. And so at first I thought, oh no, all this planning, we had a beautiful model. We had brought all this gear, took tons of gear with us.
The car was detailed. It was clean.
Yeah, everything was ready to go. But then it dawned on me that, hey, this could work to our favor. And that's where you're talking about serendipity. The thing that's the first lesson to learn from this is don't let your opinion of your circumstances guide your action. Go out to shoot no matter what it looks like. I mean, we'd had bad weather for days. We were thinking of canceling the shoot. We just said we're going for it. We got there and the lake was there. We continued to go for it. And the lake ended up being a big part of the picture because it gave us a lot of beautiful reflection of the clouds and the sunset. So that's, you can only plan so much, and you do have to be willing to adapt and change. But we had a great crew. We had you and Pamela Berry, who's assisted both of us. We had my assistant, Tom Shue. And then we had a very, very great model, a young girl named Nancy, and she's fearless. And so we had my 2011 Jaguar XJL as the other model. And you brought a lot of video gear. Talk about I brought some too, and you used it.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the video gear that you used.
Well, one of the things we wanted to do was produce a behind-the-scenes clip. And there was two reasons for this. One, we were out there doing some new techniques. We had some new equipment that we'll talk about in a second that not a lot of people have seen or used. And we wanted to get documentation. But, we took the approach and we said, okay, let's get a lot of coverage. Now, one of the mistakes that people make is that they have all these bags with lots of lenses and they don't own a lot of bodies. Well, we just had a bunch of camera bodies. In fact, some of them were super cheap bodies, the 7D, which is not a bad camera, but it's not the most expensive camera, but it works just great for video because one of the things people forget is that when shooting video, you're barely using the sensor you have. So it's very easy. And we set these cameras up, and Pam and I were running from camera to camera, triggering them off, and we were able to get 5 angles of coverage. We also had a chance to play. I refuse to give it its full name, but we used one of the motorized Kessler dollies, which was great, and we were getting some tracking shots, and that's fun. You know, it's you kind of feel like you've got like the kid with the race car, but this has the motor, and so we were able to get the camera tracking side to side. And one of the things people forget on that is I also set it at a diagonal, so as the camera would move into the shot, it didn't just feel like it was moving and revealing side to side, but you got this feeling like you were pushing into the action. And we set the focus as such so that the focus would sort of creep over the edge of the car as the camera moved closer. So there was all sorts of great things, but for the most part, it was a pretty straight shoot. Decent glass, a lot of prime lenses, because that just let us soak up the light. You had a lot of light there, but for some of the angles I was shooting really low light because the lights were all focused on the car. But with the 2.8 lenses, super easy to open up. We even had some 1.4s and 1.8s. I had no problem with light, even though it was the middle of the night.
Yeah, I was using my favorite, the 1DX, and my assistant Tom Shue was shooting with a 5D Mark III, two relatively new cameras. My primary lens was the brand new version of the 70 to 200 f2.8 ISL lens, but I was working on a tripod much of the time because we were shooting in dark conditions, and I wanted to make sure I had rock steady exposures.
And I want to actually, before you step off of that topic, because you just say that like it's a matter of fact and that everybody knows this. One of the things, this thing I keep running into, it happened when I was at Photoshop World 2. For those of you listening that somehow feel you're more of a man because you could do the Kung Fu G.I. Joe grip and look how rock solid I am as I shoot without using a tripod or a monopod, those are for wussies. Use the freaking tripod. You know, I don't care what you think about it. It's what the person buying the photo thinks about it or the person looking at the photo thinks about it. And you were pulling some really long exposures, and it was beautiful. It just let the light paint across the surface.
Yeah, well, we actually did some light painting, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, I wanted to be able to work at low ISOs, shoot long exposures. I had to shoot with a relatively small aperture because you want the front and the back of the car to be in focus. And I'm shooting the car at roughly a 45-degree angle.
Wait, car manufacturers don't like bokeh porn?
No, they don't. They don't. They're not interested. That's not impressive to them. And so it was fun. And we did a behind the scenes shoots. We had the dolly for the camera, but we even used the GoPro Hero 2s to do a time lapse. So we had 7 cameras going at all times. We have this thing covered from every angle. And Tom did some backup shooting just in case anything happened to my camera. The bottom line was we got great light. We had a great model. And the sunset turned orange, and we got the reflections, and then we used my super secret weapon.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun. It's not from Broadcolor. It's not from Elinchrom. It's not from Alien Bees. In fact, it's not from any lighting company because it's a truck. And it's the only one like it in the world. Now, I've done my Jeremy Clarkson impression. It's a 50-inch LED light bar. It's from a company called Rigid. It's capable of throwing light about 30 yards, and it covered the entire car, and we moved the truck forward and backward to control fall off. And then we had the sunset behind the car, so the truck was providing a fill light in the front, which was perfect.
Yeah, and it worked great because what we were able to see is that we weren't overpowering the background lights. We were able to use those to set the mood for the scene. But the LED lighting was perfect. It just evenly filled in the whole car body. The nice thing about this is that it was a bar. Now, for those of you saying, well, how do I do this? Well, one method is you can modify your truck. there are places that do that, and some of you who actually some of our listeners may be in this. I mean, I don't want to get into the legalities of the IRS and everything else, but it is a production vehicle. It was totally stacked out with outlets and gearboxes and safe ways to transport everything there, so it was awesome. But you can get LED lights. There's a wide range of LED lighting out there that can run off a battery. The great thing about this is that it was just perfectly even. It was at the perfect height, and it was highly portable. It had its own power source and its own grip truck. So, the truck just carried the light where it needed to be.
Well, yeah. the truck runs off two Odyssey, which are very high-end aftermarket batteries. So it'll run 2 hours without the ignition being turned on, and then it'll run as long as the gas lasts if you need it. But we didn't need to turn the ignition on. It worked really well. If you can't do something like that, you can go to borrowlenses.com, who I'll just mention right now is one of our sponsors, and you can rent Kino Flows, and you can rent battery packs, and you can get the almost identical same experience just by renting products that are very affordable compared to buying a truck and then throwing $100,000 at it. But you can do the same kind of thing. The idea is to match the ambient lighting, and you'll note, Rich, that we got the parking lights and the tail lights to come on, and they showed in the picture. The LED light did not overpower them. It's very important to get the ambient light going, and just not only around the car, but the car itself. And then, of course, we had to have enough light for our beautiful model, who was tastefully lit and posed from the back so that you don't really see anything, but she was naked, and a nice compliment to the car. And then after that, we decided to play around with some light painting. And I must say that you, sir, are a light painter extraordinaire.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yes, if there was any doubt about my talents, give me a glowing stick and tell me to run around in a circle, and I'm good at it. So, you know.
Yeah, we used another sponsor's product, Jerry Guionis. We actually are. He's sponsoring us for his wonderful Ice Society, but he also makes this thing called the Ice Light. It's a little bit spendy at $500, but let me tell you, oh my gosh, we had one of those, and there's nothing that I can think of that's better for light painting, because the Ice Light has a black bevel that covers 50% of the light. So there's a black bevel on the back and the light on the front. One of the problems when you're doing light painting is if you get the light into the scene and the light shows, it becomes overpowering and it's too strong. But because you used both your body and the bevel on the Ice Light to shield it as you moved around, it was perfect. And I did a 30-second exposure. Again, you've got to have a tripod to do a 30-second exposure. I don't care if you're the Incredible Hulk. You're going to have a tripod. Also, don't forget to turn on that long exposure noise reduction, which many people forget to use when you're using those exposures, because they can get noisy even at low ISOs. And then what you did, Rich, was great, was you moved in a tight pattern that ended up making the picture look much like a wind tunnel kind of thing, only with light. And it was spectacular.
It was a lot of fun. And the nice thing about the Ice Light, and that I really liked, is that it was very easy to hold, and it put off a lot of light, so you kind of feel like if that other side wasn't shielded, you would totally feel like a kid with a lightsaber toy, except the quality of the light was very even, and it wasn't red or green or blue. It was perfect light.
Daylight balanced, and so are the lights we had on the truck. Some of the other considerations here were, shooting at the right angle, getting everything at the right height, making sure. The other thing is we're in public. This dry lake bed was within, a couple hundred feet of a busy highway.
Can you get tickets after the fact? Can they say?
Well, I've seen worse out there, believe me. But, we had to have the model nude, so we created a very respectful system. We worked with your female assistant, Pamela Berry. The model was in a robe at all times. Pamela was the escort to our model, Nancy. And we would get her in position, do all of our lighting setups and all of our testing while she was wearing the robe. And then when we were actually ready to shoot, Pamela would take the robe off, step just out of the camera range. We would make just a few exposures, and then we created a signal, which was done, done, done. Pamela immediately covered the girl back up, and so nobody saw anything. It was great. It worked very well. And I have to say, your crew and my crew combined did a great job. We've seen some of the results have been posted at photofocus.com. We're going to have more because you're going to do some behind-the-scenes videos for us. We also have had some stuff over at my car site, carloves.com, if anybody's interested. Before we get to the Eddie Tapp interview, which is, by the way, something you do not want to miss, because this guy is a real craftsman. He knows stuff about photography that you probably don't. That's my first best guess. I want to thank ViewBug for sponsoring the Photofocus podcast and the blog. We have a $10,000, actually it's more like 11 now, photo contest with ViewBug. Just search ViewBug Photofocus Photo Contest or go to our blog and check on open contest. ViewBug is the great place to enter photo contests, win lots of prizes. And if you've got a company that wants a photo contest, be sure to get in touch with them. They really know what they're doing. Also want to thank SmugMug for sponsoring the show. Great place to host your photos if you're trying to sell them as well as video.
Yep. So, are we ready for the Eddie interview, or do you want a quick recap of Photoshop World?
It was a great show. You and I had great sessions. We got to spend time. One of the real perks about being a speaker at Photoshop World is that you get to hang out with all the other speakers in private rooms, and they're like all your heroes. So that was fun. And I really think it was tremendous.
And what I was excited about is that it felt like some of the passion was coming back in again, that people were getting optimistic. A lot of times I see in the industry people start to get negative. Obviously, Photoshop World's a fun show with a lot of nice people, but I was just hearing good stories about people getting busy again, people happy with what they're doing, markets stabilizing a bit. So we'll see if this was just a fluke or a trend, but it was nice to see happy photographers together. So I'm hoping some of our listeners are seeing the same thing, that there's an increased demand for their art, and definitely a lot of cool things coming down the pike. Adobe showed some stuff and talked about some of the things that were new, and then we saw some stuff that is coming. And if you have not tried it yet, I would encourage you to take a look at the Creative Cloud, because that's going to give you access to some really cool stuff really soon. I am allowed to say that. I can't tell you what's next, but I'll tell you real soon, and I think you guys should give that a shot. So we did, though, one of the best parts about Photoshop World, you mentioned we got to talk to some of our heroes and people we totally respect. One of those guys is Eddie Tapp. We had Eddie on a few months ago, but we were able to catch up with him on some totally new topics. Scott, you sat down with him, and why don't we take a listen to that interview now?
All right, and we'll be back with another edition of the Photofocus podcast in 10 days. And in the meantime, while we're getting to that interview, be sure to visit photofocus.com. Follow Rich on Twitter at RedPixel, RHEDPIXEL. Follow me on Twitter at Scott Bourne, SCOTTBOURNE. And we'll see you in 10 days. And here's Eddie. Hi, Scott Bourne here, along with the great Eddie Tapp. Hi, Eddie.
Hi, Scott. Thank you.
We're here live in Las Vegas at Photoshop World, so we have access to all these great photographic talents, all these great Photoshop instructors. Eddie, you're a tremendous Photoshop teacher. I actually sat in on one of your classes in Seattle like 15 years ago. You probably don't remember meeting me there, but I've followed your work a long time. And, of course, we've gotten to know each other more recently through Skip and all the things we speak at. But the one thing I've admired about you is you're a photographic craftsman. You care about photography. And we're going to talk a little bit about Photoshop in this quick interview. But, I wonder what your reaction is to the fact that we live in this recipe-driven world where everyone just says, "Oh, Scott, just give me the recipe. What are your sharpness sliders? What f-stop did you use to take that picture?" And I'm like, it doesn't matter what f-stop I use, because the light's going to be different when you get there, and it's not going to matter what shutter speed I use, because everything's going to be different when you get there. But they all seem to think if I buy this camera and I use that f-stop and I use Ed's 1, 2, 3 Photoshop recipe, that any day Scott Kilby will call me and I'll be a speaker at Photoshop World.
Well, that's true. We have a craft that we used to endure, where we would actually concept the image, produce the image, and take it all the way through the process. And today it's a digital playground. There's just so many options of push this button, press this way to get that type of look. You're absolutely right. So in the midst of this thrust of what's going on out there in the digital playground, we've kind of lost the concept of a craftsmanship. And I'm glad you mentioned that and are talking that, because I actually have a program that I call Crafting Digital.
Well, tell us just a very brief synopsis of that, because I think you and I share the same passion. We're about the same age. We remember when we had to load a roll of slide film in. There was no Photoshop, and it was like we had to nail the exposure because we got about a third of a stop either way to play with, and that was that. And then we sent the slides off, oh, the horror, in the mail to the customer. And I mean, we didn't have any way to cheat. We had to get it right. So give me a little flavor of what you're talking about.
Well, you're right. We had a film we had to work with, and that film had a color temperature to it, it had a speed to it, and it had a contrast curve to it. And that's what we had to learn.
Right.
And when we learned that film, we could craft that film into our workflow. We could get predictable results.
Because we knew what to expect.
We knew exactly what to expect.
Right.
In digital, we have a variety of settings. We have a variety of abilities to change the settings from one image to another. And the auto, as well as auto works, it's also the most confusing thing. And it takes consistency out of the kill.
Right.
And it's taken us completely away from the craft of what we're wanting to do with our images.
So the P on the camera doesn't stand for perfect?
No, it stands for professional.
Oh, professional. Okay. Yeah. So what are the 2 or 3 basic steps you might suggest to our audience who are concerned about actual craftsmanship and really want to, I mean, because I know the way you approach these images, I think of you as an artist. I don't think of you as a photographer.
Well, thank you.
I think photographs are your medium, but I think of what you and your lovely lady do as art.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much.
And it's clear to me that it didn't happen by accident. You didn't sit and wander around and go, oh, there's something pretty. Snap. Now I'll use this filter, this plug-in, and away it'll go. I mean, you think about this stuff first, right?
Well, I like the way you put that, but I think it came with passion, the passion of wanting to do something. So one thing I've found is to find something that you like. Look through a magazine. Pull out tear sheets. Come around something. When you find yourself flipping through a magazine and looking at a picture or an ad or something, what stopped you there? There's an entire psychological reason why. And if you stop and look at those reasons, it's going to have 3 elements to it: light, composition, and exposure. And those are the 3 things that we really want to become intimately familiar with. Those are 3 things that we want to utilize in our craftsmanship. At the same time, we want to have a focus to do that, because some of us don't know where to go with this. But if we look at images, perhaps from other people, and use targets, not copy,
right,
but targets, then that gives a good direction to go. But I think the biggest element there happens to be light.
Yeah, light is everything. I want to make a quick analogy here. I know a lot of professional writers.
Okay.
And they tell me whenever I ask them what's the best way to become a better writer, they say read. Reading makes good writers. And so what you just said basically is the photographic equivalent. Look at lots of published photographs by people you admire, by the greats. Look at the masters. And I don't mean the girl named Rebecca on Flickr. I'm talking about Edward Weston and Imogen Cunningham, yes, and Alfred Stieglitz and Paul Strand, and look up these people's work.
Absolutely.
And then do what you're saying, like, wow, this picture of Paul Strand, like he had his industrial period where he was shooting the buildings in New York in the 30s. And there's a couple of those that I get tingles now thinking about those pictures, and I'm like, what could I take from this? And I think that's what you're saying, right? You're like, not copy it, but what about it motivates me, and could I go do something different over here?
Well, absolutely. And my analogy with that happens to be with Ansel Adams. And I've had this beautiful book since early 70s, slipcover, printed by the New York Graphic Society. It's an amazing book.
He personally detailed the inks and had the inks created for that book.
He sure did. And the book I have has his signature in it.
Oh, my goodness. You got a good one.
But I'll never forget the day I was looking through there and I saw this image, and I'm just overwhelmed. And chills are going down my body right now as I talk about this. But looking at the detail and the shadow and the highlights, and how did you get that much information in that image? Because I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to learn how to do that. And then I looked, and that shot was done in 1923. And what?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's like we complain like, oh, these dadgum things only 4 frames a second. That autofocus isn't quite what it should be. And here's a guy carrying glass plates, hand climbing up in Yosemite with 10 glass plates. He's going to break 2 of them on the way up, 2 of them on the way down. So he's got 6 shots and an 8x10 viewfinder. But I think what you're alluding to there, as we've talked about on Photofocus, is pre-visualization. In other words, you see something in your mind's eye, and it could be inspired by an Ansel Adams shot, or inspired by an experience you have, or a place you've been, and then you go try to make that image, rather than what we're seeing a lot of with the new people today, which is happy accidents. They wandered by something pretty. They took a picture. They made it prettier using this filter. What if you sat in a dark room and closed your eyes and tried to see something in your mind that you wanted to make, and then you spent time going out to do that? And you made fun of me when I did my Cranes into Fire Mist shot, which took me 13 years, and I remember telling you the story about it, and you said, why didn't you just Photoshop those two birds in? And I slapped my forehead and thought to myself, boy, I wish I'd have thought of that 13 years ago.
You know what? If I said that, it might have been in jest.
It completely was. I know you were. I know you were joking.
It was such a respect for the passion and demand that you put into that shot.
I know you were joking, but it's like I slapped my forehead. Went, oh! Well, so let's talk about one more thing. What's another thing? Like you mentioned, light. What do you think is the best way for the beginner is to really immerse themselves in light and to learn about light and to love light?
Well, to learn to see light is something that takes time. You don't just see light. We're actually born seeing light. And when we learn to see light, we realize we've always seen light. We've never noticed it before.
Right.
So when it comes to what we do, it's the quality of light. And we kind of take that to, how does the camera see the light that I'm seeing? And that's quite a different story. So when you start to learn what you're seeing and how the camera records that, and that's in a process, that's when light becomes much more accessible to become intimate with for what you're doing. Suddenly you see the light, you realize how that's going to react with your imagery, and it takes some time sometimes. But perhaps the best thing to do is to find a subject, an object, and to photograph it in various lighting conditions and kind of study it that way. But seeing light is something that is, to me and to people that I've talked with, a life-changing experience.
Well, to piggyback on that, I think that, one of the things that I did when I started out was I got I guess you know about these, they call them Shirleys.
Yes.
Like a little modeling head.
Absolutely.
Like a mannequin head. And then I'd put the light all these different places, and that's how I learned what a loop shadow was.
Good.
And
yes.
all that kind of stuff. And I remember before doing that, I was so clueless. And when people would talk about loop shadows, I'd try to be cool and go, yeah, I know what that is. Had no idea. But I'm like, that's a loop shadow. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is so powerful. And I did this in my bedroom with a stupid little Home Depot light and a Shirley.
Perfect.
But the other thing that you mentioned earlier about films I want to add real quick before we wrap up is you learned films. Like I bet you learned Tri-X or maybe some of the Portra films back when Kodak was making them. And you probably learned all those tone curves just like the back of your hands. You knew where the latitude was, and you knew how far you could push it, right?
Absolutely.
Well, our camera sensors are much like that. If you bought a Canon 7D, it's got those same characteristics
available.
And the one thing that bothers me is that people change cameras now with every new camera.
Yes.
So how are they going to learn what those characteristics that are available on the 7D are? Because before they even get used to it, then they upgrade to the next one and the next one, and they never really learn a film where we would spend literally 4 or 5 years shooting the same film. So we always knew. Like when I shot Velvia, I knew it was going to be punchy. I knew that if I took it into a dark place and let the exposure go long, I was going to get reciprocity failure and all the purples were going to blow up. And I was doing that by choice. So, you go into the slot canyons, you shoot Velvia, you shoot a 60-second exposure, and those red canyons go purple. And everyone goes, we didn't have Photoshop back then, so I couldn't paint them purple. What do you think about that? Does people change cameras too often, do you think?
I don't know about that.
You don't? It's just an idea. I just wondered how it applies to what you think with the film thing.
Well, what the technology, film had characteristics that we had to learn and become familiar with. And as soon as we had that ability, as we talked about earlier, we could then get results that we knew what we were going to get in the final product. Today, you have to take that analogy to the digital table because there's so many settings, there's so many options in the camera, from your ISO speed, which affects your contrast, to your color balance, your white balance, to the matrix setups that you might use for contrast, color space. All those things affect your images. So consistency is the key to learn. If you can set your camera on manual and come up with a system, you're just going to use this setting and that setting and become consistent with that and move to the next table after that, you'll find yourself in a much better place, and you'll find yourself crafting your imaging much better, I think.
I'm sure our audience is aware that they've just heard from a master craftsman, and I know you all are going to be asking me this question, so I'll ask you, Eddie, where can they find out more about what you're involved in? I mean, do you have a blog, Twitter accounts, Facebook, etc.? Because I'm sure they're all going to want to follow you.
Well, yes, Twitter at Eddie Tapp. EddieTapp.com is my website / blog.
Well, you got a lot to share, my friend, so we'll make sure to put those links there and then update those links for our audience if you do anything different.
Well, I am doing something different. I'd like to share that with you.
Go right ahead.
I'm very excited about it. I have come up with a company that's contacted me. It's called Udemy. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yep.
And I've put together a training course on there. I'm releasing my first one right now as we speak.
Okay.
On smart objects. And it's a smart object workflow. It's a little more advanced workflow in Photoshop. Right. But because of my demand to get the best possible quality out of my files, smart object workflow is the way that I maintain that today.
Okay.
And this course that I've just put up online is designed to teach what smart object workflows are all about.
Okay.
And it's a study program. It's not just a seminar.
So this is at udemy.com/smart
objects.
Okay, buddy. Well, thanks for joining us on Photofocus.
Thank you, Scott. It's always a pleasure and honor.
And we hope to see you on a show soon.
Thank you.